Welcome to A Closer Look with the Monitor. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Prairie Public. Each week, we go beyond the headlines with reporters from the North Dakota Monitor, a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization covering state government, politics, and public policy. Of course, you can read all of its reporting free without subscriptions or paywalls at northdakotamonitor.com. It's a website truly worthy of adding to your daily reading list. Today, we'll learn about an organization that helps people confront housing discrimination across North and South Dakota that's facing an uncertain future. High Plains Fair Housing Center has been waiting since May for a crucial installment of a federal grant. Without that money, the organization may have to furlough half of its staff, potentially limiting assistance for people facing discrimination, seeking disability accommodations, or trying to remain in their homes. North Dakota Monitor reporter Jack Dura has been following the funding delay and what it could mean for the people throughout the Dakotas, and he joins us for a closer look with the Monitor. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Jack, as we begin, let me introduce you to our listeners. You're a Fargo native, and you've been reporting in North Dakota for about a decade. Tell us a little bit about your background and the stories you plan to cover for the Monitor.
Oh, that's true. I'm a Fargo native, an NDSU graduate. I've worked at newspapers in Fargo, Hillsboro, Watford City, and most recently I was the capital reporter for the Bismarck Tribune for 5 or 6 years, and then worked for the Associated Press in a similar capacity for the last 3 years before I joined the Monitor last month.
What's your beat with the Monitor?
I cover all things state government, elections, courts, and politics, really anything that affects public policy or our state elected officials.
I think the Monitor is pleased to have you, Jack, and we'll, of course, be looking forward to our conversations in the months down the road. Jack, let's talk about the High Plains Fair Housing Center and its financial situation. What brought that to your attention?
I recall it was chatter on social media, and my manager, Amy Dalrymple, said to take a look into it.
For listeners unfamiliar with the organization, what is the High Plains Fair Housing Center?
The High Plains Fair Housing Center is based in Grand Forks. It's the only fair housing organization in North Dakota as well as the Dakotas, and it helps people who are facing housing discriminations and need accommodations where they live.
So what does their work look like when someone calls them up or reaches out to them asking for help?
So the center investigates, mediates, and resolves housing discrimination complaints, and they assist with reasonable accommodations such as closer parking spaces, changes in rent due dates, and adjustments to heavy doors and mailboxes for people with disabilities, for instance.
How much demand, Jack, is there for these services across the region?
Well, last year, the center fielded nearly 1,000 phone calls. More than 1/3 of those calls were related to allegations of housing discrimination, and the others were about landlord-tenant matters or general inquiries. Over the last year and a half, the center has handled about 100 calls from South Dakota.
Your story focused on what's going to become perhaps an unexpected gap in federal funding. How did that gap develop?
So this money relates to the third installment of a 3-year grant the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development had awarded in 2023. The second year of funding had ended in May, and the center expected the third year to start the next day. But through a series of communications with HUD, it became clear the money wasn't going to show up on time, and they are still awaiting that grant money. It's $425,000 of a federal housing initiatives program grant, and it's crucial to the center's future.
So this money has been awarded, it's been federally approved, and yet it still may not come to the group. Is that accurate?
The money is expected to come, but it's unclear when. The center's executive director, Michelle Ridds, told me it could come tomorrow. It could come in more than a year. It is really unclear when it will show up. They've had discussions with HUD about the timing of the grant.
What explanation, Jack, if any, has the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development provided for the delay?
That's unclear. It's unclear why the money hasn't shown up yet. I'm aware of other organizations around the country similar to this one that are facing similar problems. I just read about one in Spokane, for instance, which has a similar situation, a grant about the same size that has not shown up yet, even though it's been approved and authorized, etc.
When the story was first reported in July, the center was preparing to furlough several employees. How immediate has that threat been?
So at the time we did the story, the furloughs were expected to be about a week away. However, since then, after the center's been in touch with North Dakota's congressional delegation and the center's board has met, they haven't furloughed staff yet, even though furloughs were expected to be fairly imminent. So now they're kind of waiting. They're in a holding pattern until September 1st to see if this grant shows up before then.
Do we know how large the organization is, Jack? How many people it employs?
So the High Plains Fair Housing Center has 7 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee.
What's the center doing then to continue operating? How is it able to extend beyond the time that it was thinking it may have to furlough?
So the center's executive director told me she's been doing fundraising, and in the meantime, its operations are continuing as usual.
And so September 1st now is the date targeted where if this grant doesn't occur, then the furlough could happen, or could other things happen with inside the organization?
So if the grant doesn't show up by September 1st, they do expect to furlough 4 of their 8 staff at that time.
Do we know what those staffing reductions would impact, how they would affect the people seeking help with a housing problem?
Yes, the center's associate director, Nikki Green, told me that with reduced services, fewer people would know about their civil rights and be helped in their housing situation. And a fair housing specialist with the center I spoke with said that clients of multiple employees would have to be passed on to fewer staff, and that would be tough for the staff to juggle all of that with fewer people handling the caseloads.
Jack, do we have a general idea about who would be impacted?
So the center assists people within the scope of the Federal Fair Housing Act, which prohibits people from being treated differently under a variety of protected characteristics. These include race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability.
Are most concerns that are brought to the organization resolved without having to file a formal complaint, or is a formal complaint filed right away and then we go through a formal process of resolution?
So, like I said earlier, the center received about 1,000 calls last year, about a third of which related to allegations of housing discrimination. The center reached slightly over 200 resolutions for clients. Their intake team, according to their annual report last year, they were able to assist half of all their housing discrimination clients through mediation or other types of intervention without legal action. And their annual report says they filed 12 complaints with HUD or the State Department of Labor and Human Rights last year.
And then those go through a formal process for resolution that can take perhaps a little more time. Enjoying my conversation with Jack Dura. He's a Fargo native who's been reporting in North Dakota for about a decade, and he now is with the North Dakota Monitor. We are visiting about Jack's reporting about High Plains Fair Housing Center and how it may be waiting now for crucial money and could face furloughs as soon as September 1st. High Plains is based in North Dakota, but it also assists people in South Dakota. How did that expanded role develop?
Right. They handled about 100 calls in South Dakota over the last year and a half. They had a HUD grant, which ended recently, that was specifically for working with organizations in South Dakota and educating people there about the Fair Housing Act, with the end goal of a fair housing group starting up there. But the center's executive director told me the way the grant is set up now, it doesn't look like there's the possibility for a new organization to step into a fair housing role in South Dakota. So they're doing fundraising in the state, and they're trying to assist South Dakota as much as possible. And if their crucial grant comes through, they will keep handling calls in South Dakota.
What role, Jack, has North Dakota's congressional delegation played in trying to get answers or secure the funding perhaps more quickly?
I reached out to the offices of Senator Hoeven and Representative Fedorchak. Both have inquired with HUD about the grant status, and Fedorchak's office even contacted the White House, and there have been conversations between federal officials and the center staff since then.
Is this an isolated administrative delay, Jack, or are there fair housing organizations elsewhere that are facing the same problems?
My understanding is there are others around the country facing the same thing. The center's executive director said that. I read just today about a Spokane-based fair housing group that's facing a similar funding gap related to the same grant. That hasn't shown up yet.
Jack, after speaking with the center staff and checking out their work, what struck you most about what could be lost?
Certainly, as the only organization of its kind in not only North Dakota but both of the Dakotas, if its work went away, that certainly would not be good for the people who call for help, who need the center's services and whatever housing problems they're facing. I was surprised to learn this is the only fair housing group in both our sparsely populated states, but that doesn't mean these issues are less important for people who live there. And only one organization doing this work. It makes you wonder, who will take up that mantle, who will handle those calls and questions if this organization, for whatever reason, is no longer able to do so.
Jack, what will you be watching for as September 1st approaches?
So I've been staying in touch with the center's executive director for updates. Certainly I'll be watching for whether the grant arrives, when that is, and what happens if the money doesn't show up.
Jack Dura is a new reporter with the North Dakota Monitor. You can read his continuing coverage of the High Plains Fair Housing Center at northdakotamonitor.com. Jack, thank you so much for joining the Monitor and for joining us today on A Closer Look with the Monitor.
Well, thanks, Craig.